Okay, all right. Okay, so Alfie Kohn needs no introduction, really. I think we all know that beautiful name and your amazing work. But I guess for just a few people, perhaps in the Let's Raise Emotionally Intelligent Kids community who don't know his work, Alfie studies and writes about the issues of education, of parenting, and human behavior. He's published many, many books on these topics. I think a few of the amazing, well, they're all amazing, but a few of the big ones are Punished by Rewards and No Contest, The Homework Myth, and actually one of my favorite is Unconditional Parenting. And you're also a huge advocate for progressive education, which I feel is just coming so much more up to the surface now due to, COVID and lockdowns and all of those things that we experienced over the last couple of years. People are really seeing that a change needs to happen. Would you agree with that?
More people should be seeing it, but I'm not sure I share your optimism that there's been any significant change.
Yes, you're 100% correct there. So I've got a few questions that I would love to get your perspective on and your wisdom on. And I guess we will jump straight in. I just want to thank you again for giving us your time and lending us your brain for me to pick. So thank you.
No problem.
So first, I think a lot of parents now are really realizing, I think, that we have been, in a way, conditioned to see that we see kids as inherently bad and naughty and manipulative and willful and in need of controlling. Can you sort of speak to this and I hope correct us on this, because I know it's such such an underlying issue with parents around the world.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting observation. It took me a while to realize that a dark view of children and beyond that of human nature really underlies a lot of traditional advice that parents and teachers get. And I actually did some writing to challenge the assumptions about that. In fact, I wrote a whole book years ago called The Brighter Side of Human Nature, a book about altruism and empathy that I don't mind telling you has sold dozens of copies over the last 30 years, as well as some chapters and articles more recently. And I think you're right. We also, and in fact, there's some research showing that when parents and teachers are likely to use punitive consequences, it's often a reflection of darker views they have about how kids have to be sort of forcibly wrestled into civilization and doing decent things. But what a lot of people don't realize is that the flip side of punishment, which is rewards, where we're basically using sugar-coated control instead of saying to people, do this or here's what I'm going to do to you, we say to them, do this and you'll get that. Treating kids as if they were pets by offering a doggy biscuit when they please us or impress us. And sometimes it's a verbal doggy biscuit, as in, good job, I really like the way you ... And I think you're really onto something there with your observation that too reflects a very dark view of human nature. When you think about it, if a child does something nice, is really helpful or caring, there's an assumption among many adults that we have to reinforce that artificially with our approval. Yes. By saying, I really like the way you shared your dessert, because, well, why would we feel that need? It must be because we believe it was a fluke. And without the artificial inducement of the reinforcer, kids would never do that again. My rule of thumb is the higher the voice goes, the higher the pitch and how squeaky it gets talking to little kids, the darker the view of human nature.
Oh, God, I love that. The higher and the squeakier the voice, That is just profound. And I think so many of us don't realize there's such this undercurrent or this conditioning, that we don't even realize we have. And I was a therapist, a speech pathologist for 10 years before I moved into, talking to parents about emotions and emotional intelligence and what's underneath behavior. And oh my gosh, did I use rewards in my therapy? I feel awful.
Yeah.
Like, it's everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, but you had the awareness and the insight and perhaps the courage to question your practice and question the way you were trained to say, and this is the key distinction, not just I'm doing it wrong. In other words, I need to be more effective in what reinforcers I use or on what schedule, but rather all reinforcement, the very idea of rewards and punishments and so on, is problematic. And it's problematic, I've come to see over the course of my career, for multiple reasons. One is something you just mentioned in passing again, which I think a lot of people don't realize. I have a rule of thumb, which is the more times a resource for parents or teachers, like a book or an article or a seminar or a podcast, the more times it contains the word behavior, the less valuable that resource probably is. Because by virtue of focusing on behavior, it's ignoring the children who engage in the behavior and whose experience is what matters, their motives and needs and values that underlie and inform it. So I think you're quite profound when you say something like, I looked at what's beneath the behavior, and the vast majority of people who are pop behaviorists don't do that at all. And once you frame it just in terms of behavior, you're more likely to resort to bribes and threats, which we euphemistically call, positive reinforcement or consequences, in order to extinguish or reinforce, to change the behaviors we, the more powerful people, happen not to like. A second reason that it's not just disrespectful and it's not just sort of conceptually inadequate to look at this, at behavior, mostly at behavior, and to use things like rewards, is that they're not only ineffective in the long run, they're counterproductive. They do damage. Praise and other forms of rewards like stickers and star charts and extra treats and privileges and so on, or conversely, time out, which is a euphemism for forcible isolation of young children, or other punishments, actually make whatever the thing is you want to get, it's more likely to undermine it. So, for example, multiple studies have found that children whose parents reward or praise them frequently are less generous and caring than their peers. And the same thing is true with respect to anything we want to encourage kids to do. If you reward kids for reading a book with a good grade or a sticker or praise, you can almost see them before your eyes become less interested in reading. Because, first of all, you're controlling them, and they don't like to be controlled, and they associate the control with the behavior you're rewarding them for. And secondly, by virtue of saying, if you do this, you'll get that, you now make them less interested in the this.
Yes, they're more interested in the that.
Yeah, so now they're thinking, if they have to bribe me to do this, it must be something I wouldn't want to do. And so that's true of any activity, art or science, computers, helping, reading, whatever it is. The moment you reward them for doing it, or worse, for doing it well, the less intrinsically interested or motivated they tend to be. And then finally, one more piece to this, which I didn't see when I wrote Punished by Rewards, or I barely understood it. It's that rewards, including praise, are conditional forms of acceptance.
Yes.
They say to kids, they teach kids, you have to do this in order to get my acknowledgement, my approval, my attention, my care. So when you praise kids, you're basically treating it as a transaction. I care for you a lot more and get a lot more excited by you when you jump through my hoops, when you're smart or do well in school or good at sports, or when you're funny or pretty or whatever. And the key point here is that kids don't just need to be loved by us or even loved a lot. They need to be loved unconditionally, which means that it's never dependent on their being well-behaved or impressive. And virtually all rewards and punishments communicate that conditionality, which is actually the last thing that kids need for healthy flourishing. So there are multiple reasons why the answer is not just to do rewards or consequences a little differently or for different things or in different ways, but to question the whole concept underlying this way of doing things to children and instead move toward working with them.
Yes. Oh, that's beautiful. So, so profound. Just that that concept of needing to zoom out and look far, far from above at the whole concept of, you know, how we treat children and what we're doing to them, right? So I love how you describe that. I think I'm very concerned about how we often inadvertently or unwittingly teach kids to look outside of themselves, which is the rewards and the punishment, to know what to do or what feels right or what they should do, you know, what's morally correct and things like that. They're, as you said, we're teaching kids, you need to look to what I want you to do. And I'm going to set the bar and the expectation, especially in classrooms, you know, with those behavior systems, and we have dojo points and oh my goodness, just
oh God,
like, oh, it's ridiculous. I actually had my son come home. This is probably a couple of months now, and he's 8. And he came home and he said, Mom, I've got a sore back today. And I said, oh, why? You know, you like to play soccer? Did you run around too much? He said, no, my teacher said that if we all sit up extra straight, we will get double dojo points in the afternoon.
Oh my Lord. I mean, you know, this is a way of treating children like pets.
Yes.
And it would be problematic enough in terms of its long-term effects and in terms of intrinsically the way children are being manipulated, even if it were being used toward a meaningful outcome, like rewarding them to help them become independent thinkers or generous people. But notice that these doggy biscuits are being used to get mindless obedience. So it's like a truly appalling goal married to an obnoxious method. It's the worst of both worlds. Sit up straight? What the hell do you care what my posture is, lady? Isn't your job to focus on my intellectual growth? You know, my social connections? But when you see your position as being to manage every aspect of the kid's behavior, right down to the way they hold their bodies, which must be done to your specifications. It's no wonder that they're going to resort to crude methods of control like class dojo.
It's just going beyond ridiculous. I feel like schools cling to those systems and they put a lot of money into them, and they feel like, well, if we don't, you know, take methods to control our students' behavior, what will they be? It comes back to that underlying kids are inherently naughty, want to do the wrong thing, and they need our control. They need us to, you know, discipline when we know that means punish. Anyway, so
yeah, right.
There's so much there. I wanted to ask actually about in terms of, I know we've touched on praise and rewards and a bit of motivation as well. And I know you speak a lot to adults, often educators, but I'm sure parents too, talking about how to motivate their kids when really they mean how to control their kids. So can you explain that? I think that myth of motivating another person that you've spoken and written about, like a child in the home to do their chores and things like that, you sort of call it like a myth of being able to motivate someone else.
Yeah, basically, you can make someone else do something. That's what
Mm.
rewards and punishments are about, but you can't make them want to.
Mm.
And many times when children are faulted for lacking motivation, really what we're talking about is just compliance.
Mm.
But I guess the real way that I found more useful to talk about this issue is not just it's impossible to motivate people, but what do you mean by motivation? And there are times when people don't just mean obedience. They mean I want my kid to want to help. I
Mm.
want my kid to want to read, not just to do it. In which case you should never reward them for doing it,
Yes.
because scores of studies find that the more you reward them for doing something, the less interest they'll come to have in whatever they had to do to get the reward.
Mm.
So psychologists for half a century now have been distinguishing between intrinsic motivation, which is where you do something because you find it valuable or meaningful, and extrinsic motivation, which means you do it in order for something else outside the task, extrinsic to the task, to happen, like you get a reward or you avoid a punishment. And it's not just that intrinsic and extrinsic motivation are different. And it's not even just that intrinsic is better and more powerful in the long run, which it is. It's that intrinsic motivation tends to evaporate in the face of extrinsic motivators. So, in short, I don't care how motivated our kids are. I care how our kids are motivated.
Mm.
And so, if we want them to be intrinsically motivated to find the thing itself valuable and want to do it, and hopefully we're talking about something important here, like wanting to be a decent person or a deep thinker, not wanting to sit up straight, for God's sake. If we want them to want to do it, to be intrinsically motivated, then we have to engage them respectfully and figure out what's going on. If there's a problem, if they act in a way that's troublesome, our job is to work with them to figure out why it's happening and to solve the problem together, to make it a teachable moment, not to merely control their behavior with rewards or punishments or outright coercion. And, when you have 30 kids from difficult situations struggling with problems of their own, maybe accentuated with COVID, and my heart goes out to teachers. I have been a teacher. I know how difficult this can be. And yet, when I ask teachers or parents, what are your long-term goals for your kids? How would you like them to turn out in the long run? I get the same answers everywhere I go. People say, well, I want my students, in the case of teachers, or my own children, in the case of parents, to be happy, to be ethical, to be self-sufficient, but also caring people, to be curious, creative, lifelong learners. These sort of answers come up everywhere. And so basically what I do for a living is I say to people, you say you want this, so why are you doing that? Here's the research to indicate that many of the practices you're engaged in as a parent or a teacher fail to meet your own long-term goals for the kids, never mind what I think about it. And that's not just true for how, for example, praise makes kids more selfish, more focused on self-interest, and less concerned about the impact of their action on other people, which is exactly what research shows about praise and other rewards. But there's other things too. You say you want kids to be lifelong learners who really get a kick out of figuring things out. Here's the research then that you should never give them grades or marks or homework, which systematically kill curiosity. So you have to choose traditional practices or those long-term goals that you just spoke about. And teachers who are tasked with too much to do and not enough support and resources and appreciation in many cases, need help turning a classroom into a caring classroom community where there are democratic class meetings And so at the beginning of the year, we're figuring out together, how do we want our classroom to be, and how can we make that happen? And then checking in periodically, where kids develop intellectual skills, social and moral development in the process of figuring stuff out together. You know, I like to say, kids learn to make good decisions by making decisions, not by following directions.
Yes.
And to walk into a classroom where kids and the teacher together are in a class meeting figuring out guidelines for how we are going to create our class and how to solve problems that come up, it is just night and day when you compare that kind of classroom to the kind of place that is using, you know, Class Dojo or positive behavior supports or various other forms of bribes and threats to get the kids to mindlessly obey whatever the teacher tells them.
Oh, beautiful. I just think you have shared so much wisdom in just that, even that last question. I was trying to not take notes and get distracted. I absolutely love your understanding and your perspective and just how you share it with us, you know, with parents and with teachers. You know, the very idea of reinforcement, focusing on the behavior, which is just so dangerous in the long run. You know, rewards, punishments, it doesn't matter. I think we're really missing the mark with how to work, as you said, with our children to solve the problems that are underneath those challenging behaviors, if there are challenging behaviors, and to look at what our long-term goals are, you know, how we really want our children to be their way of being as they're older. So my very last little short question, because I know we're out of time, is I know that your powerful work has been telling us for 20, 30 years that a lot of what we're doing with or to our children, I should say, is wrong. It's taking us so long to catch up. Do you think that we'll ever be able to let go of those old ways that focus so much on behavior and really start doing what we know works?
Well, some people will, and some people won't, and some people will a lot, and some people will a little. I mean, it's on a continuum, both in terms of how far we move in this direction and in terms of how many people move in this direction. It's not all or nothing. I think different people respond to different prods and pokes and invitations. You know, if I was suddenly in charge of a school, I would not simply mandate that we move from Class Dojo to democratic class meetings.
Oh, Alfie, are you there? I've lost you. I've lost your audio.
Hello?
Oh, yes, you're back. You're back. Sorry, it dropped out for a moment.
So I'm not sure when.
Yeah, you were saying that if you were suddenly in charge of a school, you would suddenly drop everything and move over to democratic class meetings.
Right, because you can't mandate good practice. If you try to take even very good ideas and shove them down people's throats, they'll just cough them back up. In other words, if we're going to move from a doing to a working with approach with kids, that very shift has to be done in a working with way with the teachers too, by their administrators. And so the same thing is true for parents, many of which, when they hear this stuff, instantly become defensive.
Yes.
And one reason might be that it calls into question, when you think about it, or even unconsciously when you don't think about it, the way we were raised and taught. And it can be unsettling or even terrifying because we desperately need to believe that what our parents did was done for our own good and out of love. And so it's easier to just mindlessly reproduce what was done to us when we have kids, rather than questioning, did it make sense? And what from our childhood is valuable and humane and constructive that we choose to carry forward into the next generation? And what do we choose to leave behind? And so I think there are better and worse ways to invite people to move forward. And I don't have the answers for how to be provocative to sort of shock people into reconsidering what they're attached to doing, where that crosses a line into provoking people to the point that they shut down and clamp their hands over their ears and yell, la, 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 la. And the way people do that is they don't actually say la, la, la. They say things like, well, that sounds nice in theory, but in the real world, or maybe that works with your kids, but you don't have my kid who is a handful, or there are various things that people just instantly throw up to say, it's naive, or it's impossible, it's impractical, where they're really saying, I'm not ready to hear that. Because in fact, there are ways of doing it, even with challenging kids. And in my books and articles, and there are many others, writers and thinkers and theorists and therapists who are more in what I would call the working with camp, who have lots of great ideas about how it can be done if we're willing to swallow hard, to gulp and say, wow, so praise and rewards aren't that much better than punishment? So it doesn't matter if you're praising kids for their effort rather than for their ability? Answer, no, not really. So it's not just a matter of doing this method when the kid does something wrong and then calling it a consequence. No, it doesn't matter. You could call it a popsicle, but if it makes the kid unhappy on purpose, the kid knows it's a punishment and it's going to make things worse. So if we're able to present this to people in a way that is challenging in the best sense of the word, while giving people space to say, well, I was doing the best I could, but maybe I could do it better, then they may just live up to their own capabilities and become an even better parent or teacher than they were before.
Yeah, I think if we have that belief in adults, in parents, in teachers, that we have in our children, that there is, we're trying to do the best that we can, and we want the best for our children. Yes, sometimes we're going the wrong way about it, but I love that you sort of said, come and step into the working with kids camp, because that is, I truly believe, and I know you agree, that's the way forward. Just for parents, finding simple ways to move forward, question what we do in your home, compassionately, because as you said, we all had childhoods and had different experiences growing up. But I think moving forward, we have to gently question and look at our long-term goals and look to the research and really, really take that on board and just make small little tweaks and changes to begin with. I think that's where parents could first start. So thank you so much, Mr. Kohn. I'm so grateful for your time. I know we are we are over time, and I'm very appreciative of you and your brain and your heart to share it with us all. So thank you very, very much.
My pleasure. I appreciate your interest.
All right. Have a beautiful rest of your day. Thank you.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.